Penticton is a small city facing big city challenges. You've probably heard that comment, maybe even said it yourself. Sometimes it's about housing, often it's about community safety. So how do we deal with some of those challenges? Council has made a safe and resilient Penticton one of its 4 priorities, and one of the key pillars in this is the RCMP. Today on PenTALKton, we're going to the head of the local detachment, our chief of police, and chat with her about the progress we've made and the work ahead. Welcome, I'm Shane Mills, and today on PenTALKton we're joined by Superintendent Beth McAndie. I know you have a longer title, you're the Superintendent in charge of the Penticton South Okanagan Detachment, but for us you're our Chief of Police. Now, before we dive into the deep end, I want to talk a little bit about you, because we talked about, we're a small city with big city challenges, and your background, I think, kind of uniquely prepares you for both of those things, the challenges we're facing and the recognition of what people think a small community represents and needs to be and wants to be. So can you just tell us a bit about you first?
Well, first, thanks, Shane, for having me here today and really starting this conversation. I'm in my 28th year of policing with the RCMP and joined back in 1996. And after doing my time in Regina, like every RCMP officer has, traveled back to the province of BC, which is where I'm from. And having grown up in a small northern community, I was really pleased to be able to say that I was posted back to a small community and start small. So working in Hope Detachment for a number of years, working in frontline policing, and then gradually working over to specialize in general investigation section, working on more complex investigations, homicide, drug enforcement, looking at supporting the community there with what was going on and what was really important to that small community. So after spending 6 years there, I was fortunate enough to be transferred to E Division Major Crime Unit, where I was on the Unsolved Homicide Unit. It was during those 9 years that I was able to travel all over Canada to investigate historical homicides, even working with the Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women Task Force, the Highway of Tears Task Force, Project Even-Handed, which was the Willie Picton pig farm, and also just dealing with a number of homicides that occurred in small communities across this province and really seeing the impact that type of crime going unsolved can have on communities, that unknowing sense. Really getting to get a sense of what is important, but then also working with Vancouver Police Department, who was a part of that team, and working in the downtown east side, which was coming from Dawson Creek, a big eye-opening experience as a young constable, and really, sort of set my path on where I wanted to go, focusing on major crime and supporting women and children that were victims of violent crime. So after that time period, and I was transferred to Surrey Detachment, where I worked in the Child Abuse and Sex Offense Unit and spent 10 years working at Surrey Detachment in major crime and being able to work, like I said, specializing in child and youth advocacy, working in human trafficking, working with asset and civil forfeiture as it related to ICE investigations and seizing property associated to the commission of those offenses. And then also just getting to work with a large detachment, seeing those issues with gang violence that was really sort of impacting our community safety and really setting that community in a state where, people didn't feel safe. And really getting that eye-opening experience going from a corporal to being, a commissioned officer at that level and understanding the importance of having the public's confidence as it relates to be able to ensure that their kids can walk to school safely, that they can go out at 9 o'clock at night and go to their car and feel like they're not going to be there's going to be a random act of violence. And really important to be at the table as a police officer to hear what was important. That was where I really had my eyes open to that. And then that big city police and being a mother myself and realizing how I was feeling about letting my own kids walk to school when I was off at work and know that I would be spying on them in the Ring camera, making sure that they safely departed, whether it was traffic safety or whether it was concerned about just being able to get the kids safe or online safety, all of those things that really change your perspective coming from a small community to a big community, and then when you change from being a police officer and focusing on that, but then incorporating your own family values and really seeing that perspective. I think probably starting my own family really opened my eyes to that. then making that conscious decision to move to Kelowna, and, though not as big a urban setting as the Lower Mainland, really knowing that I could bring something to the table to some of those challenges there, and excited to move my family there and, support the retirement of my husband, who was a 33-year serving member of the RCMP as well, and enjoying the great outdoors and seeing the differences there in that community, and what was important, that title that they had about crime that was happening, and and that narrative that was put out into the community there, and seeing the impacts that had on that partnership we had with the city, multiple community groups that we worked with, and being able to hear and listen and come to the table and sometimes hear messages that we, the police, didn't want to hear, and knowing that we need to lean in and we need to listen, and we're not going to always get it right. And public safety is so important to so many aspects of a community. And sometimes it's perception of public safety, not necessarily what the stats are telling us, but we need people to be able to feel like they can go to the corner store or they can walk across the street as it relates to traffic safety. And I think those experiences that I've had in that almost 28 years have taught me a lot about the importance of collaboration, sitting down and listening, and not feeling like I always have to have all the answers, that there's a lot of great minds out there in the community with the partners, the city, and having suggestions, working with other municipalities to look at what they've tried, maybe hasn't worked for them, why it could potentially work for us as a smaller city. What's the demographic of our city? We have a multicultural city here. We have huge age variation as well. We see that our demographic is more in the seniors and what's important to them, and what crimes are they feeling that they're experiencing more of, and how does that impact public safety strategies, and our youth, what's happening with our youth in our communities, and keeping them busy, engaged, and making sure that that first time we have an interaction with them isn't about a negative thing that's going on, but making it positive and proactive, getting out, whether it's through the Foundry or through the school district. Those are important things that I think I brought to the table in my discussions with various community leaders over the last 9 months. So
like I said, that I'm interested in the 9 months. So I've only been here a couple of years, and I'm probably guilty sometimes of saying I've seen worse. And people who are longtime residents are like, we don't want to be worse. We liked it the way it was. And probably the one thing everyone in Penticton can agree on is they don't want to be in Kelowna, or they would have moved there. After your 9 months, like what are your sort of the first impressions of Penticton and what you need to sort of do as the chief of police?
Initially, my first impressions is this is a community that has really embraced the RCMP. The number of people that have come up to me, whether I'm downtown walking or I'm out with my team, or if I'm sitting down to have a coffee in a local establishment, not approaching me and providing me with absolutely positive feedback about the connection and communication that they have, and they feel the officers are doing the best they can with what they have. I feel like a public statement is made when you see that the 4 priorities of your council is public safety, and knowing that there's an opportunity to lean in and be creative, be modern, really examine what we've been doing in the past and why maybe it hadn't been working. So that was really exciting for me. Obviously, a new face, new ideas, different perspective, knowing that I was really set up for success, taking over for Superintendent Hunter and the team that he built here with a real focus on mental health, wellness, employee engagement, and resourcing. I think Brian did that work, and now creating that infrastructure of this is what we have the ability to do with what we have, committed to doing as much proactive policing as we can, but it's going to be limited. We have a responsibility to answer those calls for service, priority calls for service, and we are going to prioritize repeat violent and repeat prolific offenders in our community. What I would say in the last 9 months is you definitely have to lean in and listen, and don't think you're going to come in and make a whole bunch of changes right out of the gate. I think it's important for me to assess what's going on, what's working, what needs to be tweaks. And just because you're new doesn't mean you have to make a lot of changes. Just because you're the new person, I don't believe in that methodology either. So we've refined a few of the systems that are going on internally in the detachment, and just maybe made them more attainable. And the thing is once we start something, we want to make sure we have the ability to maintain it at whatever pilot project it is. And we don't want to start off with great big bang in my first 9 months and then, 2 years from now we haven't moved the dial on anything. So we have to be realistic. We have to have the resources to push those projects. So baby steps, I think leaning in with the school district and really making sure we create that infrastructure to connect, whether it's online safety messaging to protect our children, being at the schools for various events and making sure that they're seeing police officers around the school, not just when things or criminal activities or complaints are coming in, and just really making sure that we're modernizing. Like you've said already, we're too big to be small, but too small, or whatever the phraseology goes. I'm going to get it wrong. So we have to really turn our mind to the fact that we are progressive and modern, and we need to adapt some of those principles on how we police, how we run our office, because what often people forget is that we have an amazing staff of municipal employees that support us in the work that we're doing, and we can't produce the data, we can't maintain our records, we can't get court documents out to have them assessed by Crown unless we have that support staff. And that's that untold story of how we do the work that we do, is the support staff behind the scenes that help us do that police work and make sure that police officers are out on the street. What I would like us to do, and we've talked about it in the new strategic plan, is make sure that when we are deploying proactively or we're doing a new project, it's based on what the data is telling us. I don't want to guide our members or our teams to just go out there and fight crime. We want to get the best return on our investment, and making sure that we're visible in those areas where we know that are experiencing higher levels of crime, whether it's violent offenses and or it's property related offenses, and deploying those teams there. So that's something a little bit new, and we're refining that process. And then also turning our minds to a community safety unit, and that's that piece of being able to collaborate with the other teams that we have going on, whether it's bylaws and CSU team, whether it's our integrated crisis response team, or working with interior health and the other teams that they have out on the street, working with the Foundry for youth engagement, and coming to the table to say, what can we do together? What work is yours? What work is ours? And how do we, as all of our teams are experiencing sort of challenges with resources potentially. I think seeing two of us out on a walk, whether it's bylaws and police, just sends such a message to the community about how we work together to be successful. The other strategy we're really going to be looking at is seasonal policing. We know that there's way more calls for service during that sort of May to early September. So we might adjust how you see us. We could be out on foot and bike patrol. In the winter, you might see us out on foot working with bylaws and working with some of those people experiencing mental health or addictions or homelessness, and getting them connected, whether it's going to be through the new shelter that's coming together here in the city, and going and connecting with them and making sure that they've got housing, they've got that support and that community safety wraparound response, rather than just seeing, in the summer, you're going to see us out in those high traffic areas where we know maybe there's more theft from motor vehicles, all high tourist areas, the Downtown Business Association, the Industrial Association as well. So we have to shift and adjust, and we can't be so rigid. So I continue to, try and bring attainable initiatives, but also I don't want to go great guns. Let's just introduce a couple of new strategies like the inadmissible patrons program, see how it goes. We'll do an evaluation, and then we'll be able to maintain that, or maybe we'll have to try something new. So still lots of learning, and but really exciting things going on in the detachment and in the community in this first 9 months.
So the data, you mentioned data. Everyone likes data.
I really like data.
And we have seen in the quarterly reports from you, and even before you got here, that there's a downward trend, which is positive. The crime severity index, those numbers continue to decline, which are positive. But a statement I hear a lot, you might hear a lot as well, is they don't tell the real story. People aren't reporting their crimes, and so they're not accurate. It's not accurate to say crime is down in Penticton. Well,
that's a bit of a conundrum for sure, because we can only report on what we know. And so I think it's important when we make statements like that first and foremost, the public has to have the confidence to report things to the police. We heard in the media, well, I didn't call the police because I didn't think anything would happen. I don't think that the best approach is just to stop calling, stop advocating for your rights, stop advocating for your ability to go out at nighttime and not feel like you're unsafe. And so we have to take a stance. And that stance is that I have the courage to reach out to the police, report the crime, regardless of what the outcome is, knowing that they're going to get a response from police, whatever that may look like, depending on the nature of the call. We have to prioritize calls for service. And making sure they can at least have an outcome of their, of their inquiry. I'm sorry we weren't able to locate your stolen bike. We appreciate you reporting that to us. We're going to put it on CPIC. If it's found, we'll be able to return it to you. To the most egregious crimes of, aggravated assaults or something like that, people need to come forward. Our data can only provide to the community a sense of what's being reported and what's, founded or unfounded. So there's a responsibility to the community to take ownership of the data that is out there by stepping up and have that courage. And so, whether it's through Crime Stoppers, depending on the nature of the complaint, we encourage people to use that venue as well, and calling our emergency or our non-emergency line, depending on the nature of that complaint. We're providing the best data that we have in order to communicate the issues that are going on. And we know statistically there are some crimes that people, don't come forward with, whether it's intimate partner violence, sexual assaults. Typically, we have a lower reporting on those types of offenses. And we know that statistically, that only 20% of those types of crimes are actually reported to police. There's an array of potential explanations as to why, but we've worked hard on trying to create that narrative around the support that we have through trauma-informed policing, that training from our specialized teams in the Special Victims Unit. And then there's also those other files where people, they're never going to find it, so I'm not going to report it, whether it's a stolen bike or a stolen generator out of the garage. We're not going to judge people if they leave their garage unlocked. It's sometimes it happens, and guess what? I've done it myself too. But the purpose is we need to know what's happening in our community. So we all own a piece of the data, and we all own a piece of creating a true picture of what's going on in our community.
I guess the part that the dichotomy for me is people are saying, well, we don't report crimes, but yet Penticton has one of the highest per file per officer ratio in the province, if not the highest.
So the last data, though it was a bit dated, a couple years since the province released that report, I believe that we were number 2 in the criminal code caseload per police officer. It was about 131 criminal code investigations per police officer here, which at the time was second in the province. So yes, we have an inordinate amount of file load per police officer, and that has obviously been a story of, making sure that we get it down to an average, which is around the 65 to 72.
So almost half.
Per police officer. So you do the math. We need to continue to invest in resources and policing resources in this community, and that'll continue to be a narrative of mine. I would love to be able to see us rolling out a traffic section in this community. I know I hear that a lot from people, whether it's emails or phone calls, wanting to see more presence. I would love to create a larger community safety unit. And our frontline teams, each of our watches needs to be bolstered as well, because we have a regional district area that we do police as well, and we want to make sure that they're seeing a presence in those communities too.
I'm just interested because you mentioned it earlier about seasonal. It's funny, whenever we talk about short-term rentals, we say we're a resort community and everything but name. Is it the same for policing? Like, are we going to see a bit of a spike in this quarter's numbers simply because it was summer and there's more people here?
Well, my experience is typically the summer season across the province, you're going to see a higher file count. And that's one of the things that does impact our crime severity index is that doesn't take into account the thousands of people visiting our area that influence our population when we go back down to the regular 40,000+ that we have in the community. Any given weekend, let's take Ironman. I'm sure there was 15,000 more people in our community, which means potentially that many more vehicles could be broken into, that many more people visiting licensed establishments in the community, and that does impact our crime, and it does impact our violent crime. So that's not taken into consideration as we calculate the crime severity index. And I know neighboring communities and neighboring cities in the Okanagan feel that impact as well. And we want to encourage people to come to our community to experience that it is a great place to be. But with that comes other things besides the financial impacts, the impacts that we see as it relates to calls for service for policing and crime trends. So yes, typically a Q3 is going to see an increase in some of those areas as it relates to assaults, as it relates to thefts from vehicles, theft of auto, mischief to property. Typically, that's very standard.
Now, you've just presented to council your strategic plan and had sort of four main thrusts. I was fascinated by the fact that the first one was partnerships to support and connect vulnerable people. Because I think there's always this image of the RCMP as, we always get our man, right? And that's their job. But it's really has changed a lot. It's a lot more than that, because being homeless isn't illegal.
It isn't illegal, absolutely. And I think a lot of the work that we're doing, I would think our colleagues in the fire department and BC Ambulance Service, Interior Health, the ministries, they're all seeing a little bit of a change in the work that they're doing, because we have to meet the needs of what's happening in our communities today. And we have a municipal policing agreement with the province and with the city of Penticton. And so we are a stopgap for a lot of things. We catch a lot of things that maybe not typically are a policing mandate. It is our job to extend that arm, extend that hand to support people and connect them. And so an enforcement action might not be the appropriate response, but we're going to find ourselves dealing with a person who's maybe experiencing a crisis. And it's through those partnerships and connection that we get them the correct support that they need. And it's not the police all of the time. That's reflective in our integrated crisis response team. We know that often these people experiencing mental health and addiction crisis, enforcement is not what they need. Whether they need housing, whether they need support, and that is the piece. So important to us to make sure that we have that multi-response to providing care for people in our community, but not just those people that are experiencing homelessness, addiction, or mental health, but youth as well, and our senior citizens in the community as well. Sometimes, we'll see someone that has maybe lost a loved one and they're a senior and they're not in an ability to actually move themselves out of a residence. They're going to get a concerned neighbor that gives us a shout and says, I haven't seen John in a couple of days. Well, John's fallen down and broken his hip. And it's not a criminal offense to that, but we go in and we see the situation that John Doe is living in, and there's some hoarding, potentially unable to care for themselves. That is so important for us to make that connection to those partners in the community to set this person up, because you know what, they have a good life to live and they deserve to live it, but we as the police were the first ones called to support that individual. So that's just an example off the top of my head, thinking about partnerships to support and connect people in our community. So such important work that needs to be done.
Now, you referenced the Integrated Mobile Response Team, which I think a lot of people probably know as CAR 40, because that's what the mayor called it for like 2 years while he was going at it, where you put an officer and a nurse together. And now that's been operating probably about 9 months, about the same length of time you've been here.
Yeah.
It's working?
I'm pretty biased. I've always had the luxury of my frontline policing experience since working in Surrey, Kelowna, and now here in Penticton, of having an integrated crisis response team. They've come under different names, but CAR 40, Integrated Crisis Response, Integrated Mobile Response Team. 9 months. It's been a whirlwind, and this team is exceptional. We have a great group of interested officers and nurses. They're enthusiastic about the work that they do, and forming those relationships with those people that are experiencing homelessness, that are maybe in supportive housing. And I think that's going a long way, because now when people come up and they see, we're getting continued calls for service on this individual, and someone will pipe up at the back of the room, the nurse, oh, that's so-and-so, you know what, they missed their medication. It sounds like they need some care. We're going to go find them. They typically hang out in this location, because they're starting to create that connection. It's really exciting to see. Ultimately, I would love to see this portfolio grow, but I know I'm a bit ambitious, and I'll just be happy with what we have right now. And be able to share that story with the community and the work that's having is a real success story, and reflective, I think, of the work done by this council and this community on advocating for the need for that, and really that helping that getting police officers out on the road. And again, any of our police officers will support someone who's experiencing a mental health or an addiction crisis. I want that to be known. But having this group of specialized of individuals with some training and having the nurse is just going a step above and beyond, and we're seeing absolute success on that program. So I'm looking forward to being able to showcase that.
That's good. Crime reduction strategy is another part of your strategic plan. And I guess you mentioned one of them, the Inadmissible Patrons Program.
Right.
And I guess, can you explain? I think people have this idea of what it is, and it's not about shoplifters at Walmart, but it's about people who might be causing problems more in establishments later at night, and they have a record of doing it, that type of thing.
So the Inadmissible Patrons Program is something that originated, and I was first exposed to when the Vancouver Police Department had a similar program where it was called Bar Watch. And it was where they were specifically looking at those people associated to organized crime in the Lower Mainland and having extensive or a consistent police history of being associated to violence, whether it was drug dealing, gang affiliation, and shootings or acts of violence. And knowing that those things were happening in licensed establishments, they worked in partnership to protect the people that were in the downtown core. So this now has obviously modernized, and it's been rolled out through the province in cities like Kamloops and Kelowna and Surrey, where I saw it work effectively, and a lot of the larger municipal police agencies, both RCMP and municipal departments using that. And so knowing that, in my experience, there has been affiliation with organized crime groups coming through the Okanagan. It's not just Penticton. It's a great place to visit. And guess what? People who are associated to organized crime want to come here too. And they have a lot of money to spend. And so it was using that piece of protecting our tourists, protecting our cities, patrons, and our people that live in this community. And so we wanted to run a pilot project this year and partnering with some of our local establishments and hotels, looking to see the effectiveness of creating that presence in the bar, knowing that, or a hotel, saying that, we take a stance on this. You're not permitted to openly wear your organized crime affiliation, whether it's tattoos or clothing, and showcase that affiliation, because it doesn't create a sense of safety, and it promotes that type of sort of behavior that's associated to that type of specific group. And so we were able to partner right out of the gates with about 6 of our establishments. And then as it unfolded in the community and we saw the impacts it was having on some of the groups that were visiting the community, we had other people sign on. And it was really encouraging to see that momentum. And an inadmissible patron is ultimately a person known to police that has had an affiliation with organized crime and drug trafficking, drug affiliation, acts of violence, firearms, or openly wears that affiliation. And so we enrolled that training with those partners and then our own detachment members as well. We have to be lawful in the execution of that program. And I'm happy to say that so far the feedback has been great. And I was happy to be able to partner with the city of Penticton on that and get the support from this mayor and council. Again, a nice step, as it says, public safety is important to this community.
One of the other things that you did was around focusing on stolen cars. I don't want to say you ran a sting operation, but you really focused on recovery you did a period of time there.
So again, this is that experience of working with partner and provincial agencies across the province and being able to pull that connection from the Lower Mainland up. And I saw this team Impact, which is the integrated policing unit that municipal police and RCMP that are working in partnership to address auto theft in the province. So we extended an invitation to them to come and work in the South Okanagan because we saw auto theft increasing in March and April. And we actually knew they had never been to the area. And we thought, it's about time. This unit's been up and running for quite some time. And this is an amazing place to work, so let's invite them. So they took us up on our invitation, and we have some unique challenges because we're quite rural. After you get outside of Penticton, there's lots of places, and using the investigative techniques that they use, it's tricky to address those people that we know are responsible for this type of offense. But I want to say that, based on the 4 days that they spent in the South Okanagan, I would say we were relatively successful. We were able to arrest a repeat auto theft offender who was one of our repeat prolific offenders in the community that we had identified as someone we wanted to prioritize. So we had him in custody, and I believe he still remains in custody on some additional charges. We were able to recover a number of stolen vehicles from Midway and in Oliver. And I think I spoke about this to council is we had 3 individuals that were identified in Alberta's top 100 property offenders were located in the Oliver area, and we were able to take enforcement action on them. So I think it was productive for the 4 days that we had this team in our communities, and we will continue to work with them, and we've invited them back for next year.
That's great. You mentioned prolific offender.
Yes.
Whenever I go on social media, that is like the one thing that drives people crazy. And I know it's not your responsibility, but your predecessor used to say there's 2 types of prolific offenders: those who need help and those who should be in jail. And I'm just wondering, do we still have that unit that was focusing on prolific offenders? And is Penticton part of the Crown's idea of trying to target prolific offenders? I know they were setting up teams.
Yeah,
for that.
So we were trying to change the language using repeat offenders, just because they've started this new initiative. And so the Butler-Lepard report was a review to have the provincial government look at repeat offenders or prolific offenders, and they made 28 recommendations. And a lot of this was some of the work that had been done years ago, even I think when Chief Superintendent Haugley was here as the inspector, so quite a few years ago. And basically, we are a part of the Revoy hub. There is a hub that is located, there are actually a number of them throughout the provinces. There's one in Kelowna. And we have 9 identified persons on that Revoy hub, which is everybody coming to the table, Crown, probation, police, to discuss that designation. And they have to have had police contacts related to specific offenses to make the designation of a repeat violent. So we have 9 for the South Okanagan, and we regularly meet monthly to discuss our approach and strategies. We were pretty happy to be able to report that I think 6 of the 9 were in custody. So we had 3 that we were, actively coming up with strategies to address their crime in our communities. But we also know that one of the big things that's impacting Penticton, they are repeat property offenders, and they don't meet the designation for violence because they're not committing violence. They're just really annoying as it relates to property offenses. So we need to come up with a strategy. So our crime reduction team every month has their top 5 that they work on coming up with enforcement strategies. And the exciting part about it is it's not just the crime reduction unit, it's actually the entire detachment. And we had even partner with BC Highway Patrol and give them the information around these repeat offenders so that we can come up with ways of having a unified response to how we're dealing with them. They might have 5 interactions with 5 different police officers, and if everybody isn't communicating, no one would necessarily know that they were dealing with Joe Citizen. But if we're talking about who our priorities are, realizing that there's 5 files, Lori Rock and Paul Bentham are great at this and keeping the watches connected. Well, we submit the 5 charges together, and then we do bail comments about the impacts that these people are having on our community, and we're consistent in the messaging that we give to Crown so they can really assess the totality. It's our responsibility to serve up the best court package we can to Crown for them to be able to make that decision. And if it's coming in 5 different formats, we have the same format, but if it's coming from 5 different officers, it looks different until it comes in a stack of 5. And then Crown's like, oh, they're on board with this strategy, and we have a responsibility to do quality, consistent investigations for us to make an impact. And that's what our teams are doing right now. They're really leaning into that. And so we're doing that every 30 days. We do a factory reset and saying, are we addressing the right people in our community? Do we have a unified response to how we're dealing with these repeat offenders?
And one of the things you guys have been doing more of since you've gotten here is sort of telling your stories, particularly on social media, which I think is important because most people won't know that you're doing these things, but you're starting to tell those stories. So I think that's very important. But my final question for you is you've laid out all of your experience. I think it's safe to say you're an expert when it comes to this. But when you're talking to people, because we're not going to eliminate crime. Crime will always exist. It's always existed going back to, Cain and Abel had their disagreement. But how should we be measuring success going forward? And is that the wrong way to approach it? It's not like a statistical number. Hey, look, we've got it here. We're done. Like, how do you, after 28 years, keep coming to work every day enthused? Like, where are you trying to get to?
Well, for me, it's always leaving a place or a community or a detachment or a team better than I found it. And I found a pretty great team, so I feel lucky. We always want to leave the city with a sense that the police are trying their very best and that we care and we're ready to listen. We talk about core values, transparency, honesty, and admitting when we're wrong or we've made a mistake, and just continuing to gain the trust of our community. There's always going to be that segment of a society that, is not supportive of police or, have had, negative experiences with police. And we have to be mindful of that always. But we also have to look ahead to where we want to go and create a clear vision. And so I'm hoping that through the work that we've outlined that we would like to accomplish in our 3-year strategic plan, that we're able to present, that we've set out on a mission and that we're constantly going to be reporting out, whether it's quarterly or annually, to the city on how we're moving the dial on those 4 areas. And you're right, crime stats is not the only thing about measured of our success. We have employees showing up to work every day with a smile on their face, showing up at their best for every citizen. It's hard to do the work of policing. And, we don't know what's going on at police officers' homes. They could have little kids that are sick, trying to support their spouses with post-secondary education. They've moved to a new community where they know no one, but yet they're showing up, they're doing the work that they're doing. They feel supported by their management. They feel supported with the training and the equipment to do the job safely. Then that resonates and that shows to the community that they serve, whether it's walking a little old lady that has lost her way and can't find her way home, but we remember where she lived because we walked her home last week, right? Where we're getting still invited to the table to have conversations with community groups because they value our contribution, admitting that we're not always an expert or the subject matter expert, and spending the time to listen in and lean in, that we remain compassionate, we remain open to new ideas, that we're constantly examining, well, we've always done it this way. Well, does that make sense to still do it this way now in 2024? And so there's lots of ways to measure our success. And I hope that the only way that we measure success is not just through our crime statistics. It's through an array of things that we do in the community, showing the work that we're doing, communicating the work that we're doing, having the discussion like we're having today, opening emails and responding back in a timely manner, making people feel in that moment that that police officer cared about the fact that this was the most impactful thing that has ever happened to them. And I felt like in that moment that police officer cared. And so I hope that's how we show the measure of our success in the next 3 years, and constantly being able to assess what we do and being able to, do a factory reset if we get something wrong so that we can move forward. So continuing to invest in our police department, just with resources, but with equipment and tools and training, showing us that compassion, from our citizens every once in a while when, sometimes we're at a pretty nasty traffic accident, and instead of, maybe being a little abrasive because there's a road check, realizing that that police officer just had to tell a loved one that they've passed away. So there's a whole thing, Shane, as I think about what the success of policing looks like for us in this community, and I think there's more to follow.
Right. So we're a small city that's facing some big challenges, but we're going to do it together.
That's the only way we can do it.
All right, well, thank you, Superintendent McAndie, who has been our guest here today on PenTALKton. I'm Shane Mills. We'll talk soon.